What's up, guys? We have a great start and sit video for you today. Starting off, here are my starts at quarterback. First off, I'm going with Brock Purdy. Purdy gets a good matchup versus the Buccaneers this week, who have struggled versus the pass this season, and the return of CMC should help the 49ers offense exponentially. Deebo Samuel also looks likely to play in what should be a game in which the 49ers put up a lot of points. This week, I'm also starting Kirk Cousins. Cousins gets a great matchup versus a reeling Saints team that just traded away their best cornerback. Drake London looks like he will return this week, and Cousins should be able to continue his hot streak. This week, I'm also starting Jared Goff, who I like to bounce back this week after only putting up 11 fantasy points in the previous game. The Texans will be without two starting D linemen in this game, one of who is star edge rusher Will Anderson, and for that reason, Goff should have decent time to throw the ball and put up lots of points in fantasy this week. My long shot start is Derek Carr. I expect Carr to be throwing a lot in this game versus Atlanta, who hasn't been great against the pass this season. Obviously, Carr will be without his top receiver in Chris Olave, but he is a guy who's been known to chuck the ball around the field. He has a shot to put up a good fantasy game. This week I'm sitting Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers has started to find his groove a little bit, but his offensive line is eviscerated by injuries right now. And the Cardinals do play pretty decent defense, and I'd just go with other options this week. I'm also sitting Caleb Williams. Williams will be without both of his starting tackles in this game, so I expect the Bears to take a more run heavy and dink and dunk approach in this game. And finally, I'm also sitting CJ Stroud. Stroud is a great real life player, but he's been struggling in fantasy football as of late. And it looks like this week Nico Collins is not going to return, as was earlier reported. This is a tough matchup versus Detroit, and I'd roll with other options if you can.
Okay, everyone, here is your starts and sits at the running back position for week 10. First, your starts, we have J.K. Dobbins, LA Chargers. As long as he is healthy, he's going to be the workhorse, it looks like, and the Titans are middle of the pack, so he should be a start. Next, Christian McCaffrey should go without saying. I'm only going to do this once. You drafted him definitely with the top three pick, and as long as he also is healthy, you definitely have to start him and have him out there. Next, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants. He's clearly now the RB1 in New York, and every time he gets the ball, he's explosive and looks like he can take it to the house. And the Carolina Panthers are the worst against the run. Your long shot is Bucky Irvin, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was removed from the injury list this week, and even though they're kind of in a three-way committee, he should get the most touches and make the most of them. Your sits are Alvin Kamara, New Orleans Saints. There's just no one left on offense anymore. I mean, they are so banged up, and I look for Atlanta to key in on him. And also, Atlanta has been top 10 against the run. Next, Raheem Mostert, Miami Dolphins. With Tua back and A Chain, it's clearly A Chains, and Mostert is in a timeshare for the RB2 position. Finally, Travis Etienne. I get it. You definitely took him in the first 5 rounds, more likely in the first three. I myself have him in Sun, and he's just banged up, not as explosive, and you might even be needing to cut him for better players.
You know who you're starting and sitting at wide receiver position? If you don't, maybe this will help. We're starting Tank Dell of the Houston Texans versus the Detroit Lions. Detroit's defense has always been a stop the run first, ask questions about your secondary later, and it's very evident by them allowing the most targets, catches, and yards to opposing wide receivers. Also, Nico Collins is going to be back this week, so should take some heat off of Tank Dell. And speaking of taking the heat off, Drake London's going to be back. So we're starting Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the New Orleans Saints. Last week, Mooney led the team in catches and yards, and he's got 4 TDs on the season. We're also looking good matchups. Amari Cooper and Khalil Shakur of the Buffalo Bills taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Listen, Keon Coleman's going to be out, so expect the targets to still be there for Cooper and Shakir. And when you got Josh Allen throwing to you, what more could you want? My long shot of the week, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jefferson, obviously somebody who's going to take the bulk of the attention away from the other receiving corps. And let's face it, Jaguars, they don't have that good of a defense. It's going to be lots of points. My only concern is that the Vikings do get a lead early and they tend to lean on the run. I'm sitting this week Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals taking on the New York Jets. The New York Jets secondary is good. They have been clamping down, maybe not last week, but clamping down on good wide receivers for most of the year. And their secondary, they tend to take penalties instead of allowing catches to happen. It's evident in the Jets being the second most penalized DBs in the league. We're sitting Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers taking on the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans defense is only allowing the fourth least PPR points. Pretty good, and they're third lowest in yards per target to slot receivers. So Ladd McConkey not looking like a good matchup. We're also sitting Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos at the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are looking to lock down Sutton as he is the main threat, and Bo Nix could be very flustered in the pocket with that Chiefs pass rush coming at him.
Here are some tight ends you should be starting and sitting in fantasy football this week. First off, I think Cade Otton is a must-start fantasy tight end, at least until Mike Evans returns in 2 weeks for the Bucs. During Evans' absence, Otton has emerged as Baker Mayfield's favorite target, garnering 31 targets over the past 3 weeks. This week, the Bucs are playing the 49ers, who are getting Christian McCaffrey and Jawan Jennings back on offense, which could mean that the 49ers will have the firepower to pull away from the Bucs. This would mean that the Bucs would be forced to throw the ball more, and Otton should see high volume again. Next up, I like starting Taysom Hill against Atlanta. Atlanta is giving up the 9th most points to opposing tight ends, and New Orleans will, in all likelihood, be without Chris Olave in this one. Hill is the ultimate gadget player who will compile receptions, red zone rushing attempts, and maybe even throw a pass or two. Due to his running ability, he has a higher fantasy floor than most tight ends, and he can really have a big game if he turns a goal line attempt into a rushing touchdown. Next up, I like rolling with Kyle Pitts this week against the Saints. Pitt's season has been a roller coaster for fantasy managers with mega highs and the lowest of lows. His inconsistency and unpredictability are frustrating because you never know if he'll put up 0 or 20 on any given week. But he has had over 5 targets in 4 of his last 5 games, and he is oozing with talent. So even though he might bust in the worst way possible, it wouldn't be wise to keep him on your bench against the Saints team that just fired their coach and has lost 7 straight games. Lastly, my long shot start of the week is Zach Ertz. Ertz faces the vaunted Steelers D this week. That means that the Commanders are unlikely to run away with this game, and the game script will be geared towards throwing the ball throughout the game. Ertz suffered last week from the Commanders running the ball heavily in the second half with the Commanders dominating, and I think that won't happen again this week, and Ertz should benefit from that. I like sitting Sam Laporta this week. Jameson Williams returning makes the Lions receiving room pretty crowded for a guy who has seen limited pass-catching opportunities this year. Laporta looks more like a touchdown-dependent play for the rest of the season, so I think you can keep him on your bench in this one. Next up, I'm sitting Pat Freiermuth. Freiermuth is a great real-life player who suffers from low volume in Pittsburgh's run-heavy offense. Russell Wilson doesn't really pass over the middle of the field, and Muth is averaging less than 3 targets per game in his last 4 starts. He should be glued to your bench this week. And lastly, I am sitting Cole Kmet. The emergence of Rome Odunze over the past 2 weeks has left Kmet as an afterthought in the Bears' offensive game plan. Also, I think the Bears could pull away from New England in this one, so they might be running heavily. Here are some defenses to start and sit in fantasy football this week. I like starting the LA Chargers this week because they have a great matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Titans are one of the worst offenses in the league, and they are starting Will Levis this week. Levis has been a turnover machine throughout his young career, and I like the Chargers defense to compile sacks, interceptions, and they shouldn't give up too many points either. Next up, we are starting the Chicago Bears against New England. This is a great matchup for one of the league's better defenses, so I like the Bears D to come up huge in this one. I also like starting the Vikings defense this week. The Vikings D is a pretty strong unit overall, and they can be tough for opponents to handle. The Jaguars already didn't have a great offense to begin with, and they will be starting Mac Jones this week, so look for the Vikings to get some turnovers and sacks. My long shot start of the week is the Falcons defense. They get to play New Orleans this week, and New Orleans have lost 7 straight games and just fired their head coach. They'll also be without Chris Olave, so look for the Falcons to have a nice game. I am sitting the Texans defense this week, and that's simply because they're playing the Detroit Lions. The Texans are not a bad defense and are certainly rosterable, but since Detroit is averaging 39.2 points per game over their past 5 games, I can't advise starting any defense against them right now. And next up, I'm sitting the Denver D. Denver draws a tough matchup against the Chiefs.
this week, and the Chiefs' offense has greatly benefited from the addition of DeAndre Hopkins and the reemergence of Kareem Hunt. And I like Pat Mahomes and the boys to put up some points in this game. Lastly, I'm sitting the Jets defense against Arizona. Kyler Murray should bounce back from a tough week last week, and I think the Jets might struggle to stop all of the Cardinals' offensive weapons.